So I've been a strongman coach for the last 15 years, and today I'm going to tell you some of the things that I've learned from coaching the strongest men and women on the planet. For those of you that don't know, some of the athletes that we coach under MST systems, we've got Mark Felix, Luke Stoltman, Luke Richardson, Shane Flowers, Rob Kearney, Lucy Underdown, Matt Ragg, Andra Fodge too. We've got Ryan Bennett, Paro Dwyer. We coach some of the strongest men and women on the planet that are regularly competing in the Giants Live and World's Strongest Man scene. So I'm one of the small handful of people that have been able to collect data over the last 10-15 years of working with some of the strongest people that have ever lived. This isn't just the strongest people on the planet currently, this is the strongest people that have ever lived, period. So during the video I'm going to talk to you about the 5 phases that you might go through on your journey from beginner to World's Strongest Man level strength, and I talk about the peak that we're going to be using for Matt Ragg to hopefully pull 505 kilos. And I tell you the phrase that Andy Bolton said to Luke Richardson while they were gaming that kind of confirmed to me that some of the theories that I was playing with probably are true and influence a lot of the way in which I train the strongest men that have ever lived. So in this video we're going to talk about my new training approaches to how I train these athletes at this level, how and why it's working for them, but why you shouldn't be doing it yourself. But we'll talk about how you should train if you're a beginner, if you're intermediate, advanced, and if you're getting towards that kind of level where you think you could be competing with the strongest people in the world, how you should be training. We're going to talk about Luke Stoltman's deadlift, how he pulled a 400 for 2 into 360 kilo for 2, huge deadlift PB with the new training style and approach that I've been using. Matthew Ragg and how he pulled 460 kilos using these exact same principles, and how I'm going to mold and apply them and slightly adjust them so that he can pull hopefully 505 kilos in Vegas. Make sure you stick around to the end of the video, guys. So there's going to be so many nuggets in this video, whether you're a beginner, whether you're advanced, or whether you've already been in a World's Strongest Man final. I guarantee you're going to get a load of good information that you'll be able to take away and apply to your own training, or even just see a little bit further into your strength journey about where you are now and where you might need to start changing things as you get stronger and better as you go through the sport. So when I think about building the strongest people in the world, we need to take things into phases, and I think there's 5 phases that you need to look at, and everyone's going to potentially, when they come to a coach, be at a different point. So you need to be able to decide where and which this athlete is at. We've got the newbie phase, which is where basically they're completely fresh, they haven't really done much training at all, but they want to get into the sport and they want to become one of the strongest people in the world. We need to start with somebody as a newbie. Next, we've got a beginner phase, which is what I would classify as someone that's been in the gym. Maybe they've done some bodybuilding or just general training in the gym, and they've built a foundation of muscle and they're pretty strong. They feel like they're the strongest in their friend group, and they want to get into the sport of strongman. This person's going to be a little bit different because they're a bit further along than that newbie. Then we've got an intermediate. We've got someone that's actually done a little bit of events training. They've been training for a little while in terms of building the foundation of strength. They've got good mechanics on the things like the deadlift and the squat and the pressing, and they're just kind of getting introduced into competing and lifting and doing events training. Then we've got a more advanced athlete who has been competing, done a lot of competitions, they're strong, and they've basically got to the point where they need to get into really minute details and start to make tiny 1% changes. And then after that, we've got the elites, we've got the people that have been doing this for an extremely long time, and they have kind of mastered all areas of the sport. They've done hundreds and hundreds of sessions on every event, and they basically are at the point where they just need to be able to try and maximize their performance and increase their longevity. So each of these phases you're going to train differently depending on where you're at, and it's important to make sure that you know and understand where you're at so you can train accordingly, which is why if you're not at the elite level, when I reveal how the strongest people in the world train, you might not be at the point where you need to train like that, and it might actually be detrimental to your progress to do so. If you're in phase 1, guys, and you're a bit of a newbie and you're just wanting to get into the sport and you haven't trained before, it's super important that you need to understand that you have to go through this initial phase first of all, and it's a bit of a mistake to try and jump a phase and get into doing things that a beginner athlete might do. So if you're a newbie, you need to build your foundation, because it'll haunt you if you don't do this. You need to make sure that you treat yourself as more as someone that's going into the gym and learning and understanding how the muscle groups work, how to contract and increase mind muscle connection, and just understand what the function of your muscles are. So what do my lats do? What do my biceps, triceps do? How do I contract my chest? Different muscles in your leg, etc. You can't skip this phase, unfortunately. So it's a very basic phase of training, which with regards to training splits, you could just do a typical bro split where you trained chest, back, legs, and arms or something, shoulders. You could do whatever split you wanted, but it's all about accumulating experience in the gym and just understanding how your body moves, understanding how to contract different muscle groups, and understanding how you actually adapt from training. So getting used to training, being a little bit sore the next day and then recovering and then kind of going in and doing things again. You need to understand concepts like how far can you push yourself. People in the newbie phase don't understand what failure is. In fact, it can be difficult to get near failure when you first start training, because you just don't have the ability neurologically to get there. So you have to go through this phase of training, which unfortunately isn't a short phase. It might take you a year or two to actually build up a decent amount of muscle tissue, good mind-muscle connection, and get yourself that foundation of kind of general strength, resilience, and understanding of what your body's doing before it's ideal to move into this more beginner training phase that we're going to talk about next. If you've already gone through phase one, you've already done this, and you're a beginner getting into the sport of strongman, how should you train? So you've got this foundation of kind of muscle mass, you've been doing loads of different exercises and machines and stuff. You want to now take your training to the point where in the gym, you're kind of training a bit more like a power lifter / weightlifter. So you're really focusing on squatting, deadlifting, overhead pressing for strongman is key, but I do believe bench press and keeping bench press in at this stage is really beneficial as well, just to help build some overall strength. So you're going to be squat, bench, dead, overhead pressing. You want to look into things like push pressing as well, and using a more complete movement pattern other than just strict pressing weights. You want to learn how to use leg drive, so you might want to look at some kind of Olympic weightlifting videos, things like that, and just understand how the body moves and start turning yourself more from a bodybuilder style training into a more of a strength athlete style training at this point. At this point in time also would be a good time to use or add in events training. But the thing with this beginner phase, guys, is it's going to be a long time. Again, it might be a year or two. So maybe for the first 6 months to 8 months, you get used to just squatting, deadlifting, benching, push pressing, etc. And you just get comfortable doing that and get really efficient with those movement patterns. And then you add this next section in, which is where you start actually playing with some strongman events. When you're a beginner, you basically have to learn everything in strongman from scratch. So frequency is your friend. So if you have access and can get to a strongman gym semi-regularly, it'd be a good idea to just basically throw yourself in and do as many events as possible. In strongman, you've got things like grip events where you've got to hold for time. You've got grip events where you've got to run with weight. You've got yoke or carry events where you're in back rack, front rack position. You've got loading. You've got so many different ranges of motion and so many different implements that when you're a beginner, you've just got to chuck yourself in, start practicing, make sure you've got a good group of people around you that can kind of help you and teach you and show you roughly how things are done. But you need to basically spend a load of time doing squats, deadlifts, pressing, overhead pressing, and events training, and just learning the ropes and putting in a good couple of years in this phase. Once you kind of get to the point where you've started finding events that you're really good at, ones that you ain't so good at, you've started plateauing a bit on your strength lifts, this is when you're kind of ready to move into the next phase. So, intermediate phase next, guys. Now that you've gone through those first two phases, the newbie phase, the beginner phase, and we're getting into the inters phase, this phase and the next two phases that are coming up, they do kind of start to blend together a little bit, and they do, especially the inters to advanced, it just kind of like builds on from it. So just remember that these phases, the timescales in which you're spending them is also going to be dependent on kind of genetically how gifted you are as an athlete. Some people are just like sponges, guys, and they pick everything up and progress really quickly. They sometimes get to skip the queue a little bit. You know, you get a Mitch Hooper every now and again. So, intermediate phase. This is when you've put a load of time in on your squat, deadlift, overhead press, and you've taken that to a decent static point. And also you've done loads of events training, so you've got experience in everything, and you've started to have good data. In the intermediate phase, what you want to do is build off of all the data that you've collected. Most athletes are gonna gel with certain events and basically suck at other events. So you might have, you might be really fast at moving with events, but you can't grip anything. So farmer's walk's a big weakness. You might be really good at front carrying implements, but you're not so good at loading implements. So your extension strength, like for your sandbag loads, stone loads, etc., is a little bit weak. During the intermediate phase of training, what tends to want to happen is you kind of squatting, deadlifting and pressing. You need to start to do what's called undulating those a little bit. Because you're so strong on them now, you'll tend to need to alternate whether you go heavy or a little bit lighter or moderate a little bit more often on those events to manage your recovery. And then on your actual events training, you're going to want to tick over with the things you're good at, but you want to make sure that you are prioritizing the things you are weak at. If you want to progress from the kind of intermediate to advanced section, you need to be an all-round athlete that's kind of ironed out the weaknesses, or else you can't really progress to that next level. So if you've got glaring weaknesses as a strongman, the intermediate phase is where you're going to spend a couple of years probably, where you do phases of training, where you iron out weaknesses. If you are really bad and you drop points on a certain event, you need to prioritize that event and just focus on it with everything you've got to bring it up to the standard that's required. Then you can move on to the next one and bring it up to the standard that's required. That is how you progress from intermediate to advanced level, is by ironing out all of your weaknesses. If you are genetically really gifted and blessed to this sport, you might only have a few weaknesses and it might not take you a while to iron these out. But if you do have quite a few glaring weaknesses, then it might take you a little bit longer. Also, remember with strength, guys, the adaptations that you create neurologically and physiologically, they don't just go away. So if you spend a load of time bringing up a certain event and then you put it away in the back pocket for a little bit, when you go back to it, you don't have to start from scratch. It'll almost take you 2 or 3 weeks or 2 or 3 exposures to get that neurological signaling back, and then you can almost pick up from where you left off, which is the beauty of strength training and why you can kind of build on stuff as an athlete over time. Is if you're really bad at sandbag load, absolutely hammer them for 3 or 4 months, get them where you want them, and then be like, right, now I'm going to do yoke. Yoke's my next week one. Put sandbag in the back pocket, maybe tick over with it a little bit and focus on your yoke. Once you've ironed out everything, you can really move on to this more advanced training style. If you're an advanced athlete, you will have got to the point where you've mastered undulating your main static lifts. You know how to recover from them. You know how much volume you can do and how much frequency you can do. You can manage and keep chipping away at your static strength. But you've also ironed out all of your weaknesses so that you don't really have a glaring weakness as an athlete. At this point in time, what it's best to do is to actually train your events a little bit lighter and a little bit easier, and focus on really, really minute details. Because what matters here, guys, is when you're doing loading medleys or whatever the hell you're doing, if you've got a second or two to make up, can I lap this sandbag a bit quicker? You're not actually focused on getting stronger or being able to do the event. You're focused on, where do I put my hands exactly? Can I get a bit faster if I do this? If I turn it that way? Whereabouts on my body can I move my legs the fastest? This comes down to like fine tuning now. You're fine tuning every single aspect of your game. So when you compete, you need to look at your scores and your data and go, look, I'm good at this. I'm not weak at this, but I'm losing points because of 2 or 3 seconds. How can I make up these 2 or 3 seconds? And then you start building tactics and building game plans so that you can actually do the thing that you're doing already good. You can do it amazing and perfect and just fine tune yourself as an athlete. In terms of the static strength stuff, guys, you'll notice that from newbie, beginner, inters and advanced, we're still trying to chip away with it. But once you get to an advanced athlete, you're probably going to be making what's called marginal gains, which is where it's very difficult to progress rapidly in those static lifts. So what you're trying to do at this stage is make sure that you've got good control of your volume and frequency. It might have had to drop a little bit because of the amount of weight you're lifting at this point. And you need to make sure that you're recovering properly so that you can keep chipping away all the time with those static lifts, whilst you fine tune your sport specific performance. At this point in time as well, if you've got to the point where you are a large open weight, loads of muscle tissue, loads of strength, you're probably going to be having to manage niggles, issues and injuries that are cropping up, because the only way you get to this point in time, guys, is by putting in years of work and lots of repetition. So once you get to being an advanced athlete, you need to start being more wary of the health of your myofascial system, like your muscles, tendons, ligaments, etc. And you need to be a bit more in tune with your body and recovery at this point in time. If you do all these things, once you're able to fine tune every single event and perform to your absolute best, this is when you can potentially be in the conversation for moving into this next section, which is the elite of the elite, the strongest people in the world. And I'm not just talking about open weights here, guys, weight class people as well. Everybody in any weight class, if you compete in a weight class, can get to this point as well. It's just that it's the same journey for everyone, and you've got to make sure that you've got the advanced phase, the minute details and every event ticked off. Because if you haven't done that, you just can't move into the elite phase yet because you're not ready for it. You're in the elite of the elite. This is how I train the strongest people in the world. This method that I've been using, I've not been using it for too long, a couple of years now, and I'm still fine tuning it. But I really do believe if you've gone through all those previous 4 phases, if you get to this point, this is where I believe this is the best way to train. So you've already fine-tuned every single event. You've already mastered the skills, and you've taken your strength to points where statically you're an absolute monster. So now what happens is it becomes about longevity, and it becomes about being able to extract that performance over and over and over again. Because in strongman, people often forget that when you play a sport, sometimes you don't always have the best game. You don't always play the best. And sometimes in strongman, it gets a little bit forgotten, because if you only compete once a year, let's say you've got a 90% success rate of having a really good match or a really good game. If you only compete once a year and it lands on that 10% day, and you just have a bit of a shit day, then you kind of end up comparing yourself to that performance. Whereas if you were to have done 10 comps in that year, you would have smashed 9 of them and just done bad in 1. And in strongman, people often forget this, that once you get to this elite level, there's lots of competitions. If you're wanting to do nationals, let's say you're in the UK, you've got England's, Britain's, Europe's, then you want to go OSG, or if you're in the Giants live scene, you've probably got 10 shows to do a year or something, with Worlds as well, and Rogue, all these other comps coming up. So at this point in time, you want to be able to perform at every single competition. You want to be able to turn up 100% every single competition. And the way in which you do this as an athlete that's already fine-tuned themselves is just by having amazing GPP. So your preparedness to perform is at an all-time high all the time. That doesn't necessarily mean that you are practicing the events all the time. The thing, once you get to this point in time, guys, you've trained so much and done so many hundreds and thousands of repetitions on everything, that really it becomes about the health of your myofascial system and your body. Does your body feel good? Are you fit and strong in loads of different ranges of motion? Are you able to access ranges of motion pain-free? Are you able to find movement patterns that have and ranges of motion that are weaker and exploit them and get stronger absolutely everywhere? At this point in time, that becomes the most important, because then you can have one touch-up session before a competition just for confidence and to just touch some equipment and stuff. and then go into the competition and perform. Because if you chucked Hercules into a strongman competition, I don't think that motherfucker would moan that he didn't have an 8-week build-up and practice all the events perfectly. He's an animal, so he can just go do it. And it's kind of similar scenario, because if you've got these guys or girls that are just so strong and they know how to do everything, well, as long as they're at all-time strongest, they don't actually need the specifics to be drilled into them for 8 weeks up to a show. Because if you do that, what actually ends up happening is negatives. Because they've got so much neural drive and so much access to strength in all these positions, it just takes a toll on the tendons. It's almost like building a race car. It spends most of the time in the garage getting fine-tuned and perfected and made everything perfect, and then it gets taken out for a race. They ain't ragging it round the racetrack for 8 weeks up until the race, because it would be knackered. And that's the same way with these guys that are the strongest people in the world. Is we're almost making their vessel, their body, ready to perform and then sending them out. And this is something that I've had to learn over a longer period of time, is these people need to train differently to everybody else so that they can stay at this top level. And then because I said there's so many shows, if you think about a year and they get 10 exposures at shows, that's 10 exposures of heavy training already ticked into the calendar year. You know, so as they get halfway through the year, they've already had 5 good exposures. They're going to start building momentum, show on show on show on show. Whereas if they trained for every single show, I think they will get worse every single show, because they will start picking up niggles and niggles and niggles. And this comes back to something that Andy Bolton said to Luke Richardson. I think they were gaming on COD and just having a conversation. And Andy Bolton, who, if you don't know who Andy Bolton is, you should, but he is someone who's pulled probably the most deadlifts over 400 kilos in like competition ever, I believe. And he just has an amazing track record of being able to pull out in competition amazing deadlifts. And he said to Luke that towards the kind of end of his career, he was almost experimenting with how little he could do but still extract that big deadlift on the day. And it comes down to the nervous system. Once the nervous system is so primed and exposed to certain weights, like it is for these guys that have got so strong, once you attain a certain level of neurological strength, it doesn't just disappear. But one thing that can inhibit strength is the myofascial system. So if your myofascial system, so your tendons, muscles, etc., aren't ready for the nervous system to contract fully, then it will have neural inhibition, so it will limit strength output. So what Andy was really getting at is, he's getting older, he's not as resilient as before. So if he trains a lot less and doesn't do as much and lift as much weight in the gym, he's able to keep his myofascial system healthy. And then when it is time for him to go all out, he's still been doing the reps on the deadlift, he's still been pulling the reps fast. It's still all there. He can extract that strength that one time when it's needed. And that's how you're able to get someone who's pulled the most deadlifts over 400 kilo in a competition ever, is because it doesn't just tell a tale of being strong for a long period of time. It tells a tale of being healthy for the whole period of time. He's not pulled a hamstring or popped his back or this or that in training that stopped him going to that competition. He's just been able to keep himself healthy during the time between the deadlifts and then pop out the performance. And that really took me back, because when Luke told me that, I was like, this is how I've kind of been training these people anyway. Like for Matthew Ragg, for example, the heaviest he pulled before he pulled 460 kilos was 320 kilo for 5 reps. And then he basically went into a max out and pulled 460 kilo. So by having his load exposure lower, he was able to be really healthy. He was able to do a bit more volume. And he was still, because I give him constraints, made him go stiff bar beltless, give him constraints to pull his load back, he was able to still have good neural drive, still build good positions, build good resilience in those positions. And then when you put a belt and suit on him and let him go all out, he's able to pull that strength out of him. And then the same story came around when Luke Stockman pulled 400 for 2 into 360 for 2, which he said was the best deadlift set of his life. Again, Luke's heaviest pull really was I think he pulled 320 for 5 as well. Stiff bar. Matt's was with a concentric pause though. Luke's was just stiff bar, normal reps. And then I give him 2 suited sessions, Luke. So that's all he had, 2 suited sessions. This is when I was first kind of experimenting with this method. And then the next time I tried it with someone, I give them 1 suited session. And then with Matt, he had no suited sessions. He literally did his top set of 5 stiff bar pause and then went in and pulled 460, which is why that phrase of Andy Bolton resonated with me, because I was like, oh, that's what I've been experimenting with. I've been building people up under constraints with lower load, and then I give them 2 suited sessions and a max out. And the next time it was constraints, 1 suited session, max out. And then with Matt, it was just pull the max out after finishing the training block under constraints. So it's strange that I've come to this conclusion, and then somebody that as experienced as Andy has come to this conclusion, that realistically it's just about keeping the athlete this super high level of GPP and then let them go and do the thing. Remember that they are who they are and they've got that history behind them, and I don't necessarily need to add to that history too much. Obviously everyone's going to have little tiny areas you want to add to, but it's more about letting them have full 100% access to being them on the day of competition, and then they can do it more often, more frequently, and extract their strength safely and keep putting performance after performance after performance. If you like this video, guys, you like strength and conditioning, make sure you click the next video and watch that.